Would you believe me if I told you this entire landscape was artificially created just to grow one single crop? Yup. Amazingly, this is all cornfields in the American Midwest. It's known as the Corn Belt, and it's an area larger than the entire United Kingdom. Out of the 1.6 million square kilometers of total farmland in the U.S., about a quarter of it, 380,000 square kilometers, is just for corn. Just for reference, the UK's total area is about 240,000 square kilometers, which means the US cornfields, at 380,000, are 1.5 times bigger than the entire UK. The amount of corn produced from this land is around 410 million tons a year. Globally, that number hits 1.24 billion tons annually, making it the second most grown crop in the world, right after sugarcane. But wait a minute, everyone. Do you eat that much corn? Seriously, you've probably never even heard that people here in America, the country that grows the most of it, are obsessed with eating corn. People's staple foods are usually wheat or rice, so you're probably wondering why the hell we grow so much of this stuff. Seriously, you have to combine the global annual production of wheat, 800 million tons, and rice, 500 million tons, just to barely compete with the amount of corn grown. So yeah, we can safely assume this corn isn't being grown for humans to eat directly. So where the hell is it all going? Why grow so much? And why corn? It started as the staple food that built a civilization, and today it's the crop that feeds our entire modern human civilization. Let's dive deep into corn with me, Underworld Speaker.
Corn's origin is believed to be the Mexican highlands, or more broadly, Mesoamerica. When you consider that most of the staple crops humans eat today came from Africa and Eurasia, you realize corn was something special right from the start. And its domestication process? That's not normal either. Corn's wild ancestor is thought to be a plant called teosinte, which grows in Central and South America. Now, when you compare this to other crops like wheat, millet, barley, or rice, which still kind of resemble their ancestors, teosinte looks so completely different, you'd think corn was like the adopted kid of the family. They look nothing alike. Seriously, teosinte barely has any kernels, they're incredibly tiny, and most importantly, the shell is so insanely hard you can't possibly peel it by hand. It makes you wonder who the hell was the first person to even think about eating this stuff.
The idea that people selectively bred this thing over thousands of years to create what we have today just doesn't add up. What's crazier is that crops like rice and wheat have tons of closely related species, but corn, it has none. So the best we can do is just guess that they just got super lucky, found a freak mutation, and somehow managed to breed it. And the mystery of corn doesn't stop there. Normally, plants in the wild form populations by naturally spreading their seeds, right? This is true even after domestication. You'll often see crops like rice and wheat get carried by the wind, take root in some remote place, and just grow on their own. But this damned corn, the kernels are packed way too tightly for the wind to do anything. And on top of that, the husk is wrapped so securely around the kernels that it is completely impossible for it to reproduce naturally. At this point, it really makes you wonder if it wasn't just dropped from the sky for humans to eat. So whether it fell from the sky or sprouted from the ground, corn was the foundation of the indigenous civilizations in Mesoamerica. Just like Mesopotamia and Egypt built their civilizations on barley and the Indus Valley civilization on millet, the native civilizations of Mesoamerica were able to flourish because of corn. The decisive factor is that corn is famous for its overwhelming tenacity and insane productivity, especially compared to other staple crops. This crazy high yield is possible because corn is what's known as a C4 plant.
When plants photosynthesize, they go through a process called carbon fixation, which means extracting carbon from carbon dioxide and storing it. Now, C3 plants do this by directly converting atmospheric CO2 into a 3-carbon compound. But C4 plants, they first convert it into a 4-carbon compound, fix it, and then convert it back into a 3-carbon compound to be used. You might be thinking, wait, what? If the process is more complicated, wouldn't that be less efficient for growth? Well, in reality, that's not how it works. You see, the hotter and drier it gets, the harder it is for a plant to get CO2, so the carbon concentration inside its cells drops. For C3 plants, this situation chronically causes a problem called photorespiration. That's when oxygen accidentally binds to the spot where carbon was supposed to go, which tanks their growth efficiency. On the other hand, C4 plants have that extra step where they pre-concentrate the carbon into a 4-carbon compound, which suppresses the chance of oxygen binding instead. Get it? Thanks to this, they can minimize photorespiration, and in the end, their efficiency is just higher, and this gap gets even wider in hot, dry climates. This is why corn has such insane adaptability. It grows well in any climate, from high mountain ranges to coastal lowlands. Plus, its harvest yield per seed is just overwhelming. Thanks to this, it was this miracle crop that was totally doable to grow even in the harsh jungles and highlands of Mesoamerica. On top of that, the labor required to grow it was only about 50 days a year. They had tons of time left over for other labor after tending to the corn. The entire reason the indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica could build civilizations in arid highlands and hot rainforests and even construct these massive pyramids was all thanks to corn's incredible productivity and tenacity. It makes sense then that civilizations like the Maya and other indigenous peoples literally worshipped corn as a god. It's said they believed their gods actually created humans from corn dough.
It's estimated this awesome corn first spread to the Old World sometime after Columbus's second voyage, around 1493. It came over along with its buddies like tomatoes and peppers. Since they were all originally from tropical regions, it makes sense they were first cultivated in the relatively warmer climates of southern Europe. But here's the crazy part. Europeans wouldn't even touch the stuff at first. They just grew it as an ornamental plant. Now, Europeans being spoiled and super picky about their food is kind of their thing, but what was their excuse this time? Their reason was that normally fruit-bearing plants grow the fruit right where the flower blooms and dies. But corn, the flower was at the tip of the stalk, and then the fruit grew out of its armpit, the leaf joint. Huh? That is kind of weird, right? But this was all a big misunderstanding. The part at the very top is actually the male flower, the tassel. Corn is a monoecious plant, meaning it has both male and female flowers. The female flower is the part in the leaf joint. The problem was, this female flower doesn't look anything like a flower. It just looks like a bunch of hair. So they had no idea that was the flower. To be precise, that hair is the style or the silk of the female flower. The ear that the silks grow from is actually a cluster of hundreds of tiny female flowers. Once they get pollinated, each of those tiny flowers develops into a single kernel, becoming the ear of corn we eat. The leftover silks just dry up and shrivel, becoming the corn silk we see.
That's why if you actually count the kernels on an ear of corn, it will supposedly match the number of silks exactly. Anyway, the point is, for Europeans at the time, this was a kind of culture shock. No, a science shock. Because its biology went against all their common sense, they considered it unholy and refused to eat it. That's what I'm saying. But hey, you can't argue with starvation. In the 17th century, the Little Ice Age hit and massive crop failures became rampant across Europe. While all the other crops were struggling hard, the corn, it was growing just fine, totally unfazed. And, as a bonus, back then, corn wasn't even classified as food, so it wasn't even taxed. Thanks to this, poor farmers in southern and eastern Europe started cultivating corn in earnest, and it quickly became the savior of the poor, the messiah of the Great Famine. Naturally, all that talk about it being unholy or whatever completely disappeared, and corn-based dishes began to develop all across Europe. Meanwhile, in Asia, corn was first introduced to Ming Dynasty China in the 16th century by the Spanish and Portuguese. Unsurprisingly, it was first adopted and grown in the Jiangnan region of southern China, which had active trade with Europe and a warm climate. Anyway, around the 17th century, corn became a pretty common crop in the Old World. The thing is, the corn back then wasn't like what we have today. The husks were tough to peel and the kernels were super hard, so you couldn't just boil or steam them. Instead, they had to grind the hell out of it in a mill, just like wheat for flour, and then boil it down into a porridge or gruel. Of course, for the poor, even this was food they were incredibly grateful for. But then, wait, what? Suddenly, the very people who were surviving on this corn started coming down with a really weird sickness. It was called Pellagra, a terrifying disease. We're talking skin inflammation, diarrhea and vomiting, often followed by delirium and dementia. In severe cases, it led to death. And the cause? It turned out that eating only corn led to a deficiency in niacin, otherwise known as vitamin B3. But here's the weird part. Corn has plenty of niacin, about the same amount as rice. And think about it. You've heard of people getting beriberi from eating only white rice, but you've never heard of them getting pellagra from it, right? It doesn't make sense even by today's standards. So you can imagine back then, people were terrified and had no idea why it was happening. So why specifically does eating corn cause this niacin deficiency? Well, in traditional grains like wheat, barley, and rice, the niacin is in a free state, making it super easy for the body to absorb. Corn, however, its niacin is bound to other stuff like starches in a form called niacin. This makes it incredibly difficult to break down. So even if you eat the same amount, your body can only absorb about 30% of it. And to make matters worse, corn is also seriously lacking in tryptophan, an essential amino acid that our bodies can also convert into niacin. Get it? Whoa, wait. What about the indigenous peoples in the Americas? Wasn't corn like their entire diet? Were they just some kind of superhuman species that didn't need niacin? Nah, not quite. They had a special wisdom learned over thousands of years of eating this stuff. They had a process where they would soak and boil the corn in an alkaline solution, like water mixed with limestone or wood ash. This trick not only makes the hulls easier to remove, but it also chemically breaks the niacin bond, releasing the free niacin and making it way easier to absorb. This process is called nixtamalization. The folks in the Old World took the corn, but they didn't get the instruction manual. This scientific principle wasn't really understood until the early 20th century when vitamins were finally discovered. Until then, they had absolutely no clue what the cause was, and countless people, regardless of region, suffered from pellagra just from eating corn. And because it was primarily a crop for the poor, it was even worse. They couldn't afford other foods like meat to supplement their diet. All right, so once we figured out the whole pellagra thing, could people finally just live off corn? No, that was still impossible. The truth is, corn had another fatal flaw, one even bigger than pellagra. It devours an insane amount of soil fertility. Like I said before, it's because corn is a C4 plant, and it's just too efficient. Seriously,
corn consumes the most nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium per square foot of any crop. It's such a vicious plant that if you grow it for just a few years, the land becomes completely desolate. Because of this, you had to rotate it with other crops to give the soil enough time to recover. That crazy high yield from corn? Yeah, it doesn't come for free. In fact, even today, with all our advanced breeding and technology, this soil depletion problem still isn't completely solved. It's so overwhelming that even with nitrogen fertilizer, one of humanity's greatest inventions, it's still too much. Even in America's giant corn belt, they have to use a 2-year crop rotation, alternating between corn and soybeans, just to save the soil that's being depleted in real time. So this brings up another question, right? How did the indigenous peoples of the Americas manage to grow this as their main crop? Well, they also had thousands of years of wisdom for this.
It was a farming method called the Three Sisters, where they planted corn, beans, and squash all together. When they did this, the beans would climb the corn stalks, using them as a trellis, which saved on labor. Plus, the bacteria living on the bean roots would fix nitrogen back into the soil, offsetting the massive amount the corn was sucking out. And then they planted the squash right there with them. Its large vines and leaves would spread out, covering the ground, which prevented water evaporation and stopped weeds from growing. It's like an auto farming setup from a video game, right? And nutritionally, since they were automatically eating beans and squash with the corn, they didn't have to worry about the nutrient deficiencies we talked about. On top of that, wealthier households also ate a good amount of meat, like turkey or dog, so they really had no problems. Get this, before this was well known, there was a theory among Western historians that the cannibalism in some Mesoamerican cultures was because of nutrient deficiencies from the corn-only diet. But now, the mainstream theory is that they did it for religious reasons, or just for the dopamine rush. What? You know, thinking about it? That might be even more terrifying.
Corn is basically synonymous with our country. I mean, it's been grown on this land for thousands of years, long before the United States even existed. And of course, you've got the Corn Belt states like Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska. It's the heartland. We all love eating sweet corn on the cob at a summer barbecue, right? It's everywhere. But here's a fact that might totally shock you. Of all this corn grown right here in America, the sweet corn that we actually eat makes up only 1% of it. You're probably thinking, what? Are you serious? So all those endless cornfields I see driving down the highway are fake? Oh no, not at all. We definitely grow more than enough of that delicious sweet corn we love right here in the U.S. It's just that the other 99% of the corn you see isn't sweet corn. It's field corn, also known as dent corn. This stuff is used for industrial purposes, not for humans, which is why you're never going to see it on your dinner table. And this isn't an American thing. Globally, out of about 1.2 billion tons of corn produced annually, only 10 to 15% is eaten directly by people. Get this, the biggest consumer of corn is the livestock industry. A whopping 60 to 70% of all corn production is used as feed for animals like cows, pigs, and chickens. It's because corn yields are so massive that it's cheap and easy to get. Plus, it's high in starch and low in fiber, making it easy for livestock to digest and, well, get fat. Even here in the U.S., where we produce 400 million tons of corn a year, more than half of it goes straight to the livestock farms. In the case of China, which is known for raising almost as many pigs as they have people, they can't possibly grow enough to cover it, so they're the world's largest corn importer. So, where does the rest of the corn go? That stuff. It goes straight into industrial use. You know that fuel you get from fermenting grain? Bioethanol. Yeah, they make that from corn. And because the stuff is classified as a green fuel, major countries, starting right here in the US, are politically pushing it with things like grain subsidies and mandatory ethanol blending regulations. So the demand is only expected to grow. Although, when you think about the greenhouse gases from growing the corn and the energy used to process it, it does make you wonder if it's really green, but anyway. Of course, besides ethanol, corn is also used like crazy to make cornstarch and corn oil. But hey, you've probably seen stuff at green cafes or restaurants labeled as compostable or eco-friendly, right? Like the clear plastic cups you get at a smoothie shop or the disposable forks and knives from a food truck. Surprise! That stuff is bioplastic, PLA, made directly from cornstarch. On top of that, cornstarch and oil are put into all kinds of other things like cosmetics, detergents, and even wallpaper. At this point, you could pretty much say the entire world is made of corn. You know, maybe those ancient Mayans were right about their worldview after all.
But the truth is, even though we don't really notice it, we're indirectly eating corn every single day. I mean, the main ingredient in all that liquid fructose, the stuff in sodas, all kinds of sauces and snacks, that's all corn. The full name is literally high-fructose corn syrup. And it's not just that. That synthetic sweetener, maltodextrin, which is in everything, not to mention modified starches, emulsifiers, stabilizers, and gelling agents, all that stuff is made from corn. So you can't not eat it even if you try. It's basically unavoidable, like air. Now, because it's grown so much and used in literally every way you can imagine, corn is also the poster child for genetically modified, or GMO, crops. Since a lot of people are still skeptical about their safety, GMO varieties are mostly grown for industrial use and animal feed, not so much for the edible corn we cook and eat ourselves. Major corn-producing countries, especially our country here in America, along with Brazil and Argentina, have heavily adopted and are actively growing GMO corn varieties that are resistant to pests and herbicides. Oh, and yeah, some people do raise an issue with this, because that high-fructose corn syrup is almost always made from GMO corn. But look, as of right now, all the research concludes that eating GMO foods isn't particularly harmful to the human body, so you really don't need to worry too much about it. I mean, it's in so many freaking places, it's not like you could avoid it even if you were worried about it.
Oh, and as a side note, you know the popcorn we eat at the movies? Surprisingly, this popcorn is a completely different type of corn from the sweet corn we eat at barbecues or that industrial field corn I was talking about. Popcorn kernels have a very hard, special hull that traps moisture and starch. It's a variety that evolved specifically to pop from that pressure when it gets heated. It's such an American classic, isn't it? And it's so easy to make. How about tonight, instead of just grabbing a bag of microwave popcorn, you try making real popcorn by popping the kernels yourself on the stove. This has been Underworld Speaker. Thanks for watching.